Hey friends, it's Jekyll. I just wanted to make a quick video for you guys here and sort of showcase a method I've been using to source a lot of Elder and or Conqueror maps of desired layouts. So, things like Crimson Temple, stuff like that, towers, that kind of stuff. As you can see here, I have a whole lot of Crimson Temples that are either Elder or Conqueror influenced. Crimson Temple is obviously a popular one. The benefit of having these influences is on Conqueror maps, it spawns all these extra monsters from the Conqueror influence. And with Conquerors, you have the added benefit of being able to additionally use an Elder Scarab. Since a few leagues ago, they actually allowed it so you could stack multiple influences. So you can have your Eldritch influence, your Elder influence. You can stack Shaper influence on there too if you wanted to, although pretty uncommon for anybody to do that. Not generally deemed as worthwhile. And then, of course, the Conqueror influence that spawns within the map. So that's why Conqueror maps are pretty desirable material to use when mapping, especially on desired layouts like this, where you really want a lot of monsters so you could increase your chance of dropping cards. For the same reason, you might want Elder influenced maps because they also spawn all of the Elder monsters in there. And while you can't put a Conqueror Scarab on to add all those monsters back, Elder maps do have the added benefit of the fact that instead of having to kill the boss to open a portal to fight the Conqueror like you do with these Conqueror maps, with Elder Guardians, the Elder has already killed the boss. And so right from the start of the map, the boss is already dead, which makes it so only minion and player altars can spawn from the Eldritch influence. And what that means for you is you won't get any random things like drop 4 additional scours from the boss. It'll increase your odds of seeing things like Divination card dupe, increased quant, and then of course the nice Eldritch altars for the minions, such as drop an additional Blessed Orb, Exalted Orb, Divine Orb, Awakened Sextant, that kind of thing. So that's why it's typically pretty nice to have access to Elder and or Conqueror influenced maps of desired layouts like this. And I realize that there typically aren't people who have a lot of bulk of a map like this, and it can be pretty annoying and painful to go through trying to buy these one at a time from people, or if you're lucky, maybe 2 at a time, especially since the trade site is not very well optimized for buying Elder maps or Conqueror maps in bulk, particularly of a desired layout. So I went ahead and I realized that there's actually a way you can pretty deterministically source these maps. I mean, as you can see, I have about 80 Elder towers here and a handful of these Conqueror map towers. And then I just recently switched over to starting to pile up some Crimson Temples. So I did some Elders of those, and then I actually got my hands on the materials required to start sourcing some Conqueror influenced ones. Mostly just for fun. I think it's fun for juice mapping. I think it's a pretty cool mechanic being able to stack that many monsters in the map. But let's move on to the actual important bit here, and that's how I'm doing that. And as I'm sure most people could probably guess, it's from using these sextants here that force the map boss to drop an additional Conqueror map or to drop an additional Elder Guardian map. Most people will run their maps with 4 Watchstones in, which causes everything on the Atlas to become tier 16. However, something that people don't take advantage of as much as they should is actually removing Watchstones to sort of control what tier or control what maps drop by spreading the tiers out a little bit more. This is something that was a lot more popular back in the old Atlas when we had like 32 Watchstones, and so you could more easily just completely eliminate maps and entire regions from the pool. So instead of having this entire be one region, you could just like chop off an entire corner if there were no maps over here that you liked. But something we do have now that is allowing me to sort of semi-deterministically gather all of these maps is this new Atlas passive tree that we've had for a while now, particularly the Shadow Shaping Keystone. It causes all of your favored maps to never drop. And the way this kind of works is that, like, if you favor all the maps of one tier except one, so say you favor every single tier 15 map but one, when a tier 15 map drops, it's forced to re-roll to be that tier. It can only drop as that tier. Whereas if you just favorited all the tier 15 maps, you would never drop any tier 15 maps. So the benefit here is that depending on, from league to league, as they swap maps in and out and move them around in the atlas, when you add your watchstones in, you change the tier of these maps. As you can see, these maps that start out at tier 1 when you first start your atlas are tier 9 for me when I have 2 of these watchstones in, or void stones. And so with 2 in, you can see you get these tier 15 maps here, and one of those happens to be Crimson Temple. If you put 3 void stones in and you look at the tier 15s, you'll see one of them happens to be Tower. And so using shadow shaping, you can block all of the other tier 15s except for Tower or Crimson Temple, or you could do Cemetery here, you could do Port here, and there's a couple of other decent options, but mostly what I've noticed is Tower, Cemetery, and Crimson Temple. You can also do Jungle Valley, but Jungle Valley is less about juicing and more about doing like pack size strategies, which typically doesn't really involve having like Elder and Conqueror maps, so it's probably not worth it to do it that way, especially since Jungle Valley already spawns without any boss altars in the map. But those are the ones that I've noticed the most, and that's how I'm basically doing it, is I'm just blocking all the other tier 15s with shadow shaping to make it so that the only tier 15 that can drop whenever this map boss drops a Conqueror map, it has a chance to be a tier 14, 15, or 16, and every time it drops as a tier 15, which is about a third of the time, it drops as a Crimson Temple. Or previously, when I was farming all these up so I could run them later this week, a Tower map. The added benefit of using shadow shaping is that you can also drop these maps that have special implicits. It's about a 12% chance if you use all 12 of your favorite slots to block maps. And there's a couple of random ones that aren't too great, things like adds metamorphs, adds ritual altars, things that you sort of just slap on there and it's like whatever, you don't even care if you use the map. But there are some pretty useful ones. 10 additional rogue exiles is pretty niche but pretty useful. Having 10 additional unique monsters in the map can be pretty strong, especially if you're using some of those rogue exile atlas passives. And there's also some pretty good ones here, like 3 additional harbingers, which you can see I actually rolled on a Crimson Temple. 4 additional strongboxes is one you can get, although this one appears to be a little bit rarer than the others from what I've seen, but it might just be unlucky. 2 additional abysses, additional breaches, additional legion, and there's some other ones, expedition, sacred grove, all sorts of stuff like that. That can be very, very useful. And it's a 12% chance to have that implicit, assuming that you don't have Shaping the Seas on. You get a 12% chance every time you drop a map, which adds up pretty quickly to you having a pretty decent number of maps that have an implicit modifier. So like I have all of these Crimson Temples that have these implicit mods, many of which I've filtered out into other tabs, where I've decided to store a bunch of my maps that have implicits, like all of these towers I have that have implicit mods on them. And then in my dump tabs, I've got some that have implicits on them, although it's going to show a bunch of random stuff too, but other random maps and things like that. So that's always nice. You never know, you might drop a decent number of really nice implicits on Crimson Temple or Tower, and that will also contribute to a juicing strategy, or you could try to sell them. I haven't really looked at what the bulk selling market is like on those sorts of implicit maps on Crimson Temple or something like that, but I'm sure it's very useful. But that's basically the gist of it, and that's how I think that it's a really solid way to sort of source a lot of these occupied maps to really bring your juice game to the next level more reliably and without as much effort, spending several hours on the trade site whispering people one by one trying to get these maps, or going on a third-party site or whatever and bulk buying them but paying 5, 6, 7 times the price of a normal Conqueror map just because somebody has 10 of them at once. And I can actually pop a few of these in here real quick too, just to sort of show you. Right now, by having 2 watchstones in, I have all my tier 15s blocked except Crimson Temple, and then I have all my tier 14s blocked except for Canyon. So all the tier 14s are dropping as Canyons, all the tier 15s drop as Crimson Temples, and then tier 16s are semi-random. It can be just about anything that is T16 or above. So anything higher than Crimson Temple on that list, on the atlas there, is fair game for the T16s. The benefit there is that, of course, these maps, their main value is in the fact that they are occupied. And so even when you get something that isn't the one you really want, like you don't get a Crimson Temple, you can sell these maps in bulk if you get a bunch of them for a fairly decent amount of money. Typically gonna be profit. I'm not quite sure what the profit margin would be if you were to sell the Conqueror maps. I think that section is a little bit more expensive, but it's the Elder maps for sure. If you get a pretty big bulk of them, people will pay a decent price. And you can also just run them yourself in invitation rotations, so that you can get like Maven invites and stuff like that to sell to people, and things like that. But I think it's possibly one of the nicer things that I've seen that lined up sort of perfectly. The stars really aligned for it this league, with the way the Atlas ended up being set up, to where you could get tier 15 tower, a tier 15 Crimson Temple, cemeteries, etc. Cemeteries especially is a really popular one for Magic Finders this league. It's pretty much a tie between Cemetery and Crimson Temple, really. You see a lot more nice drops in Cemetery, just because you get it's a bigger map, and it's got the 5 Divine card there, and of course I'm gonna die there to the Corrupted Blood, because that's just the way the game is. Let's see if I can just sprint up in here and drop a Crimson Temple here. Oh, there's another canyon. That's 2 canyons. Both the tier 14s drop as canyons. Just go next. Oop, not that one. It's a bad map. I don't like that map. Just sprint on up. And of course you can sort of run this with your own different strategies if you've got an open section spot. One thing that I would be wary of is that if you do add this to a fairly juiced strategy where you're using all 4 of your section mods, you do have to deal with the added layer of Voidstone management, where you have to unsocket and then resocket 2 Voidstones between every map, or 3 Voidstones, or whatever it may be for you, for whatever map you like. There you go, there's another canyon. Well, I think that about proves my point, but their concern there with adding it to any other typical strategy where you would have 4 sections on all the time is this constant sort of swap where you put your sections back in, you open your map, and you take them back out. Because it only takes one momentary lapse of judgment to waste an expensive map by forgetting to put in your watchstones. But that's it. I just sort of wanted to share that. I think it's a really useful tool. I think that people could really take advantage of it to sort of help source maps of their own desired layouts for themselves. Very well, easily juiceable maps like Elder influence maps or Conqueror occupied maps like that. So I just wanted to share that. But till next time.